Hi, everybody. Nothing like starting your day with a little bit of rave. I'm really excited to be chatting with everybody today. It's my morning. It is, I think, everybody else's various parts of the day. So, like I said, very excited wherever you are in the day to spend this time with you and talk a little bit about how innovation teams can collaborate better with the organization. So give me just 1 second and I will start sharing my screen and we will get going. All right. So hopefully everybody can see my screen. I am Paula Cizek. Just a little bit about me. I'm the Chief Research Officer at NOBL, which is a very fancy way of saying that I'm responsible for identifying emerging trends, emerging best practices, and how teams work together. And once we have an understanding of those emerging practices, then I apply those to our clients to improve their working conditions. I actually started my career in brand strategy and consumer behavior, working with innovation teams to identify and develop new products, so I'm very familiar with the innovation space. The problem that I found in working with these innovation teams is that we would come together and create a really great solution. We would be able to nail exactly what it was that the customer was looking for. Unfortunately, at a certain point, they would just not be able to develop it, right? You'd be able to hand it over, put a bow on it, but the organization just really wasn't set up in order to be able to implement those. And so when I joined NOBL, that was actually the big question that I wanted to answer. I joined about 5 years ago, and the mission was to figure out how to get innovation, change, new ways of working to stick. And so the information that I'm sharing with you today has been gathered from working with innovation teams in various industries during my time at NOBL. In particular, last fall, we conducted a series of interviews with innovation teams that were embedded within a few governmental organizations. And we used that to identify what practices other teams should adopt to create lasting and sustainable change. And that's really what we do. But we don't just research the best practices, of course. We also co-create change with leaders and their organizations. Our bias at NOBL is that change must be collaborative, it must be iterative. So everything that I'm going to share with you today, we've actually tested out, we've seen in practice with our different clients. So on that note, we've heard a lot of the following complaints about innovation and innovation teams, some of which unfortunately might be familiar to you. Why are we spending all this money on innovation when we haven't seen any results? We're the ones keeping the lights on. Why does the innovation team get the spotlight? Why do they get all the glory? Why do they get the best resources and all the talent gets to go to them? We've tried innovation teams before. Why is this one any different, right? Why should I believe in this? Why should I commit my time and energy when we've been through this? It's not our first rodeo. Now, on the other hand, you yourself, if you're leading an innovation team, may have had slightly different complaints. Maybe you've caught yourself saying some of the following. The organization is too focused on the short term. This is also another way of saying, you know what, they lack the ability to see the big picture. Maybe you're afraid of the competition, that they're going to out-innovate us, right? You're looking around and you're seeing what's going on in the market, and you just don't think that the organization is moving fast enough. And ultimately, it's because the organization just can't get out of its own way, right? A lot of the tension between innovation teams and the rest of the organization is because they have different objectives, they have different timeframes, and ultimately different metrics. The innovation team, of course, is typically dedicated to exploration of new opportunities and ideas. As a result, they are typically working with a longer time frame, and the metrics that we recommend typically focus on really just production of sheer number of ideas. You're just trying to come up, test as rapidly as possible so that you can figure out what the best potential solutions are, where the opportunities lie. Now, a variation on this, we've seen some innovation teams which are not responsible for innovating themselves, but they are responsible for helping other teams within the organization innovate. And so that's a variation on it, the supporting and training the teams. The rest of the organization, meanwhile, is focused on optimization, on scale, again, on keeping those lights on. As a result, it tends to be more short-term. They're thinking about quarterly results. They're thinking about metrics which are going to be focused on efficacy, efficiency, and ultimately profit, right? They're going to be judged potentially on a P&L, on market share, on customer satisfaction. So due to the fact that they have such different timeframes, they have different objectives, but ultimately the same purpose, right, for your team, for your organization to win in the market, the innovation team is often kept separate from the organization, sometimes even physically, right? They're kept apart from the organization at large. This is often done for the best of intentions. It is specifically so they are not slowed down by bureaucracy or aversion to change. You don't want to put up roadblocks to innovation. Unfortunately, what this leads to is misunderstanding sometimes with the rest of the organization, not to mention a lot of tension in terms of what the innovation team is trying to achieve. It can also unfortunately generate a lot of bad blood, like classism, on both sides, really, thinking that they're better, they're the ones who are really driving results in the organization. The other team really doesn't get it, and ultimately this can lead to not invented here syndrome, which is a problem because, quite frankly, again, you really need these teams to work together if the organization as a whole is going to succeed in its mission. Now, the truth is you really need a scaling team. There really should be a team in between, which is dedicated to taking ideas from the innovation team and preparing them to operate at scale within the organization. But that is a different presentation, just something to keep in mind, that really scaling is a skill in itself. So innovation teams themselves actually face a lot of tensions internally in an effort to get the organization as a whole where it needs to go, where they need to demonstrate value, right? If you can't necessarily be making money for the organization, you have to demonstrate that you are worth keeping around in different ways. And so the innovation team is often really stuck trying to balance its priorities. Some of the most important ones are, of course, delivering quick wins, right? Demonstrating that it is, in fact, contributing to the organization. You're not just off in some skunk labs puttering around for the fun of it, versus really delivering long-term impact. Because, of course, a lot of ideas that you develop in a skunkworks in a lab in your innovation team aren't necessarily going to pay out for 6, 12, 18 months or more. Sometimes you need to really play nice. We've seen there's a really big question in organizations about, should we hide our innovation team away and protect them from that bureaucracy, which will allow them to move faster, or should we really have them embedded within the organization, interacting with people at large, and thereby going slower, but hopefully bringing more people along as you go, leading to less resistance overall. So like I said, there's a lot of tensions that these innovation teams are facing as they try to demonstrate their value to the organization. It doesn't have to be this way. You can and you must improve relationships between the two if you're going to succeed. I don't know who's seen The Room, but if you have, this is a little bit of a shout out. No, I want to make it clear, I'm not asking you to go in and change the entire organization, right? I know that in any organization, you're going to have skeptics. You're going to have naysayers. You're going to say you're going to have people who sit out and they're going to wait to see which way the wind is blowing before they start to participate. It can be exhausting just contemplating about this. But, and here's the really important thing, you're also going to find change champions. You're going to find people within the organization who are open-minded, who are excited about change, who are maybe trying to push change in their own realm, in their own sphere of influence. So when you are leading an innovation team, don't just think you're by yourself, right? There's probably allies and partners within the organization that you want to make friends with, you want to be able to support, but focus on what it is that you control and what you can influence, and don't worry about everything else. You'll get to that eventually. So this is a breakdown of those 3 stages of how you start to win friends and influence people. It is a process. It typically starts with stage 1, which is going to be building, right? It is establishing those initial relationships. It is starting to lay the foundations of trust. It is delivering those first wins so that, again, you can establish yourself as a real player who's someone who is committed to delivering. Stage 2, once you've laid that foundation, is starting to expand that reach, right? It is to connect with those influencers, to connect with those change champions within your organization who can hopefully all unite together and start pushing the organization forward. And the third, of course, is starting to scale. You've laid the foundation, you've built those allies. How do you really start to see change within the organization? How do you make sure that just because there's turnover, either perhaps in leadership at the top, if you have a sponsor, or even within your team, maybe you have people who will stick around for a year or 2. How do you keep the momentum going over time? And I want to make it clear that this is true for innovation teams that may have been around for a while, just as much as it is for ones that are starting up or potentially restarting. What I want you to be thinking about is where you are in the process, not how long your team has necessarily been around. For instance, we're working with a team right now that has been through several reconfigurations of their innovation team, and right now we're working with them to position it for success so they don't have to repeat this whole process like 6 months from now. On the other hand, we've worked with teams who were able to sprint through stages 1 and 2 really rapidly, but they can't seem to really break through the noise and scale because, let's be honest, there's a lot of announcements. There is a lot of communication coming from organizations, especially right now in an era of COVID. So the question for them is really, how do you break through and get attention? So again, the question is not necessarily how long you've been around as a team, but just where you are in this process. And so really quickly, I would love to hear what stage your team is in right now. And if you could just pop that in the chat window. Do you think you're in stage 1 building, stage 2 connecting, or stage 3 scaling? Just so we have some idea. Just give everybody maybe 30 seconds to do that. I know that 30 seconds can feel like an eternity when you are on a webinar, but we'll try and do it real fast. All right, there we go. All right, connect and build, stage 3, right? Proving tangible value, right? It's really hard to get out of the stereotype of innovation teams as, again, being the futurist, right, who is coming up with all these, virtual reality, all these future forward things, but teams are left wondering, like, what can I really deliver right now? So again, it doesn't necessarily matter where you are in this process, just to be aware that there's several stages. Don't worry, I'm going to go through all of them and hopefully provide some useful tips no matter where you are in the process to make your team more effective, to make them helpful. So stage 1, building, just as you would if you were creating a new product or a service, you need to establish proof of concept. You need to demonstrate, again, that you're committed to making an actual difference within the organization, that you're not just here to talk. In the first stage, it is really critical that leaders, change agents, focus on establishing that trust and that influence with each other, and really starting just even within your own team to have an understanding of what it is that we're trying to achieve and how that we are going to do it. I could have used a really clever image. I could have made this a lot fancy, but I really want to keep it simple. The most important thing that you can do, which we heard from the innovation teams that we spoke to, is really just deliver on what it is that you say you're going to do from the very first meeting. Every time you meet with someone and you say you're going to do a thing, do the thing. If you say that you are going to set up a meeting to follow up, be the first one to reach out and schedule that follow-up meeting. If they ask for more information, follow up, send them that information within 24 hours. This is really going to set you apart and demonstrate that you are committed to delivering on what it is that you said that you were going to deliver. When you're talking about larger projects, right, when you're talking about, okay, now we're going to work together and we're going to be a team as we move towards delivering these ideas, what you should do then is make sure that you're really aligned on objectives and metrics from the very beginning. Remember, the organization is going to have very different expectations of what success looks like. They're thinking about their P&L, they're thinking about market share, consumer sentiment. Don't set yourself up to fail at the beginning. Really demonstrate how you're going to make the team's lives easier, how you're going to save them time, how you're going to make other people within the organization look good. The next thing that we heard from these innovation teams, which was really critical, is to place your bets, in effect, developing a portfolio of risk. So at the beginning of their planning period, which might be a year, it might be a quarter, depending on your organization, they would actually come together as a team and identify, okay, these are the projects that we're going to work on, which are going to deliver quick wins and establish us as, again, proactive, as people who can deliver on what we say we're going to deliver within the organization. It'll make us look good. It'll make people feel happy that we're helping them out, right, that we are showing what we can do and deliver value. At the same time, you're also going to want to look for some riskier bets, some long-term bets, things which, let's be honest, you don't necessarily know if you can achieve at this point in time, but that will deliver long-term value and impact to the organization. So again, finding that right mix of quick wins to really establish yourself as a team, as well as those longer-term, greater impact projects. Now, there's a lot of ways that you can evaluate which projects to prioritize. You can use a RICE assessment, which looks at reach, impact, confidence, and effort. You can use an Eisenhower matrix. You can use AHP. Make some strategic guesses. Whatever your system is within your organization, try and figure out what the right balance is for you. Check in on that on, let's say, a quarterly basis or a monthly basis to make sure that, again, you're being realistic. The fact is that as you go, as the situation develops and market conditions change, you're going to have more projects brought onto your plate. Priorities are going to shift and evolve. You'll find new opportunities that you weren't necessarily planning on, but that will be really great for your team and from the organization at large. So don't think of this as it's something set in stone, but do consider the overall abilities of your team, the overall needs of the organization, and how you can best balance those to demonstrate value. Oh, there we go. Okay, you've set out what it is you're going to do. You have a plan for what it is. As you are working through your plan, as you are working your way towards those quick wins, I want you to think about making it a thing, right? Let's be honest, a lot of the work that we do on a day-to-day basis does not result in breakthrough insights or immediate turnarounds as much as we would like that to be the case. At the same time, change doesn't start to feel real until people start to see it happen. I know it's a tautology, but it is also true. Nothing will get people more excited about change than actually seeing change happen within an organization. Think about it. They've been promised things will be different. They've been promised that things will change before, so you really need to demonstrate that it's happening. And the way to do that is to make accomplishments, milestones, success a thing. And what I mean by that is, again, we don't typically think of the things we do on a day-to-day basis a big achievement, but they can be if we make it so. One team that we were working with had sent out a survey, and they got 800 responses. Now, typically, you would say, all right, that's great. We've got 800 responses. people would crunch the data, they would maybe send out a report to a few people, and everybody would move on with the rest of the project. But instead, what they decided to do was really celebrate it and say, hey, we got 800 responses. That shows engagement, that shows interest. People are invested in the success of this project. They shared out some of the results with the team. They made it a thing. So this, again, you've got to figure out, okay, what is it that I am doing right now, which I can turn into a mini event that demonstrates, yes, we are making progress towards our goal. Another thing that is really helpful to these teams is, again, combating the idea of innovation taking place in a lab or waiting for the grand unveiling, right? The big reveal when you've got the solution, ta-da! If you work completely separate, if you only wait to get that big moment at the end, that really just tends to increase classism between the two groups, the innovation team and the organization at large, and just encourages not invented here syndrome. If you can get people involved in the process earlier on, if you can get their opinions, if you can get them to chime in, even if you don't necessarily use all of the information that they provide, if you don't necessarily take all of their advice to heart, it's going to make them a lot more willing to sign on, right? It's going to make them feel invested in the success of their project. It's not just your project anymore. It is their project. So as much as possible, invite other people to observe or possibly shadow your team, create self-managed channels and platforms, find opportunities and channels for sharing frequent updates, right? Maybe even bring the team together on a regular basis so that they can see what is going on. Not to mention, the more you expose people to these new and better ways of working, which of course your team is doing, the more likely they are going to want to implement this in their own work life. When we're working with a team, we'll often start with meetings. We'll start improving meetings because meetings are such a pain point in an organization. If you can fix people's meetings, they'll start to be like, oh my gosh, I want this. How do I get this in my team? How do I start to spread these better ways of working so that I can have time back? So again, try and invite people in, work in the open as much as possible so that at the beginning you're starting to build that trust and ease the transition of ideas from inception stage to scaling within the organization. Getting wins in the press. I know this sounds a little bit challenging, and it is. I totally understand that, but nothing succeeds like success. External validation really speeds up the team and can clear a lot of roadblocks. So for an example, we didn't work with them. This was a case study that we found when researching, actually. When Samsung started transitioning from a strategy of copying high-performance technology to developing it themselves, their innovation team, not surprisingly, received a lot of pushback from their more conservative management team. Well, when they launched an app that they were told to kill and it got 1 million downloads, suddenly they were taken a lot more seriously. On a personal note, we worked with an innovation team at a fast food company that just started up, and they received millions of impressions from press coverage of the work that they were doing. And again, it really helped establish them as a force to be reckoned with within the organization. I remember, again, back when I was an innovation consultant, one of the things that we would hear from clients who are dealing with the organization is like, well, if this is such a great idea, why hasn't anybody else done it yet? Which is like, okay, well, what is the point of the innovation team then if you're not willing to really push the boundaries? But getting that external validation, getting people to chime in and say like, oh, this is something great. This is something that everybody else should be paying attention to, can really establish your credibility within the organization. All right, so again, I want to turn it over to you guys, mostly so that I don't lose my voice, but I'm also just interested in hearing from everybody. Again, maybe just drop 1 or 2 ideas. What have you used to build trust within your organization? How have you tried reaching out to people? So just drop it in the chat box and let's see if we can't get some ideas out there. again, we found that one of the best ways of really getting people to advance innovation within the organization, and we'll talk about this in just a minute, is supporting each other, having that peer network, sharing ideas, and working through challenges together. So I'm just checking to see if anybody has seen something work really well in your organization, and you want to try sharing it here. Let me just take a look. All right. There we go. Got one popping up. All right, monthly meetings with the whole team to show progress in each area of the business. Yeah, I think that's great. Like bringing people together to actually demonstrate, like, here's what's going on, here's what we've achieved, here's what we've learned, right? Sometimes the learnings are just as important as whatever it is that you are doing. We found that it's so critical to change the mindset of the organization. A lot of times, if something doesn't work, traditionally that is considered a failure. But it's really so important to switch that so people understand, like, it's really not a failure. It is, what have we learned? How is doing this on a small scale help us save money, right? Save time, so that we're not running all over and wasting our resources. We can really focus on what works. So I think that's a great example. We have another one: offer help before asking anything. Absolutely. Benjamin Franklin, American founding father, when he was trying to get somebody on his good side, when he was trying to negotiate, he found that he would actually either ask them to lend him a book, or he would lend them a book, because that immediately put them, there was an exchange of debt, right? Now people owed each other something, and there was some social connection there before you actually got to the work itself. So yeah, I think monthly meetings, great idea. Offering help before going to people with an ask, really great ideas. All right, so moving on, let me just grab a little water. So the second stage is connecting. Now, the other title of this particular section is how to get people to do what you want, right? You have established a certain level of trust, but now you might actually need things from people. You want their assistance, you need their resources, you need them to sign on to something. So how do you get people to actually get on board with what it is that you are doing? It's really important when you're thinking about this to remember that you can't get people to want what you want, right? People have their own objectives, they have their own goals, they have their own vision for what it is that they want to do personally, with their teams, with the organization. You are not going to be able to change what it is that they want, but you can work with them to identify ways that you could help them get what you want. You can find those win-win scenarios, and we're going to get into that in a little bit in this section. So like I said, this is all about seeking out and supporting allies. Again, because of the tension between the organization and the innovation team in terms of metrics and objectives, it is really easy for people on innovation teams to feel like they are on their own. But the reality is, like I said, that there are supporters of innovation throughout the company. You just have to find them, which is admittedly sometimes a challenge if innovation is looked on skeptically. But like I said, the good news is that these champions of innovation, these allies, these peers, they typically don't need specific tools or resources from you so much as they need peer support. They need opportunities to connect with other leaders who are going through similar struggles or who have already overcome an obstacle within the organization and can share their expertise, can share their know-how. So we actually worked with one client who was at exactly this stage, right? They had established a platform for innovation. They were starting to run these training sessions on how to encourage change and how to encourage innovation within the organization. And what they found is that during these trainings, like I said, the leaders who were already at that advanced level who are already starting to drive initiatives within their own team really just wanted the time to talk to other people around the globe, within other departments, within the other teams, so that they had an opportunity to share best practices. So as much as you're able, your job is to figure out a way to bring those people together so that they have an opportunity to really just share ideas and best practices. If you can do that, you can actually step back. You can be part of the conversation, but you want them to lead the conversation as much as possible. This is, like I said, this is especially true for teams which are not necessarily doing the innovation themselves, but are supporting other teams within the organization. Maybe your role is to train people on innovation, to train people on design thinking, new ways of working, to support in whatever way possible. This is especially true for this type of team. But like I said, I think this is relevant for anyone who is trying to encourage more innovation within their organization. Again, the skills that champions do need, they're already doing this probably within their own teams. So if they do need training, it's in terms of negotiation, change management, communication, doing what you're doing, which is convincing others that innovation, that trying new things is the right thing to do. And speaking of which, especially when you're working with people who don't report to you, who maybe don't have a dotted line, you have to figure out a way to get them to cooperate, right? You can't make people want what you want, but you can work to figure out what common ground you share and what wins that you want to achieve together. It's really helpful here to borrow some of those concepts from negotiation. When we think of negotiation, the Hollywood vision is typically like a high-stakes match of wits with a clear winner and a clear loser, but we need to really get away from that mindset. Remember, ultimately, you're working for the same organization, and you want to achieve the same purpose, right? Like you do ultimately have the same goals, so you really shouldn't be thinking of this as a head-to-head confrontation. Before you approach that partner or that potential ally, whoever it is that you want to get on board, that you want to convert to your cause, really think about what it is that they want. What are their goals? What are their incentives? What are they going to be rewarded for within the organization before you even approach them? We saw this in actually one major retailer where there was a really great idea that was developed that was going to cut across basically like online and in-store and really was positioned to make the company a lot of money. Unfortunately, one of the leaders involved who needed to sign off on this his incentive structure meant that any success from this program would not count, essentially. Like he wouldn't get any bonuses, he wouldn't get any accolades. And so as a result, they didn't sign off on the program, and the program was killed. As a result, the organization lost out on, again, potentially millions of dollars. So you really need to be thinking about what's the right incentive structure, what rewards are they working towards, how can I make sure that they benefit in this project just as much, maybe even more than me. Of course, you also do want to think about what it is that I want. You are offering, but you want to make sure that you're going to benefit from this in some way, even if, as pointed out during our poll, even if you're offering help first and you're sort of building up a bank, right, like an IOU, that's fine. That's a perfectly acceptable win-win situation. The other thing that you want to consider is you do want to have a backup plan, right? So if you can't come to some sort of an agreement, what is going to happen, right? You'll sometimes hear this referred to as a BATNA, which is the best alternative to a negotiated agreement. So actually list out and rank your options prior to even meeting with that potential ally, partner, or sponsor. If you find yourself in a really weak position, if you find that you really, really need this person to sign on to essentially support you, and you've got your back up against a wall, you're between a rock and a hard place, choose whatever cliche you would like, you should actually first work to improve your alternatives so that you're in a better negotiating position, right? What I'd recommend here is actually doing a scenario planning exercise in advance. Think about what is the best and the worst thing that could happen during a negotiation, and then develop plans in advance to either set yourself up for success or to have a plan if things do start to go off the rails. How are you going to bring things back on track? And the other thing to think about is really, what sort of a relationship do you want with this person after your negotiation is over? If you go in and you are just trying to steamroll the person and get what it is that you want, maybe you'll succeed. Maybe you'll be able to strong arm them into what it is that you need and want. But if you're in the same organization, as opposed to with a vendor or maybe with a customer, you're going to probably be seeing that person over time. They're going to have shared connections who are going to also be impacted by this relationship. So what I would really encourage you to do is determine the relationship you need from the partner before you even negotiate. Think about what their communication style is. Think about how open they are, how willing they are to trust, right? Are they extremely skeptical? Are you going to have to bring them on board? I would suggest at the beginning, when you do meet with that person, make time to socialize, right? Attempt to find some sort of a common bond. Develop empathy. Show that you are willing to listen. A lot of times when we're working with clients and we do a workshop around what it is that we're trying to achieve or what sort of a negotiation it is that we're trying to accomplish, a lot of times people don't even necessarily care about winning or getting exactly what it is that they want, so much as they care about being heard. If you're responsible for leading the innovation team, that person, that ally, might actually assume ultimately you do know what is best. It's your job. It is your neck on the line if things go wrong, and that's fine. But they have their own expertise. They have their own experience, which they think you could benefit from. They really just want to be heard, right? So give them an opportunity to share their concerns, to explore those together so that you can, again, start to feel like this is a conversation between equals and that you're working together towards some sort of a resolution. One thing that you can do to help encourage this is consider giving them something of low value to you in order to build trust, demonstrate that you are willing to bargain. And as you talk, as you get into the negotiation itself, really keep returning to those win-win scenarios. Remind them of what it is that you're both trying to achieve together to find the common ground that you are both going to share. And then at the end of the negotiation, when hopefully you've reached some sort of an agreement, credit them with coming to an agreement. Again, make it a thing. It's not a thing until you make it a thing. And emphasize that it was a fair outcome, that everybody is happy with at least a portion of what it is that you're just negotiating to. And if you're wondering, yes, I did just use gifts from Jerry Maguire to illustrate negotiation tactics. All right. The third stage, of course, is scaling. This is now expanding beyond immediate allies. It's starting to affect the organization at large, right? You've made it. You've established your team's credibility in stage one. You've gotten some early wins. You have won over some allies to your cause. But now the real question is, okay, how do I ensure long-term sustainability? How do I make sure that the gains that I've made aren't lost when people leave? How do I make sure that I continue to have influence and grow my resources and capability within the organization? The most important thing that you can do here is really communicate your successes to the organization at large. And this is going to do two things, which are honestly equally important. The first is you need to recognize and appreciate contributions. If you're reaching out to allies, if you are trying to build a support network for innovation within the organization, call those people out for supporting you, for giving their 2 cents, their time, their attention, potentially their resources to supporting you. That's really important if you want to get other people on board. People will do in the organization what they see being rewarded. And so if people are receiving accolades, it means they are more likely to sign on to your cause. The other thing that's really important to do is, of course, to demonstrate impact, to show once again that this is an innovation team which is dedicated to actually making things happen and not just talking about it. Again, we get back to this idea that people need to see change happening in order to believe it's happening, in order to start taking part of it. If 70% or so of the organization is sitting back and waiting for things to happen, broadcasting success is really critical if you want change to stick. And once you do have that evidence, people see like, okay, the tide is turning, we're going in this direction, they are more likely to get on board. They're less likely to resist whatever changes it is that you're trying to implement within the organization at large. So the first thing that you need to do is use whatever existing channels exist within your organization to make your presence known, and ultimately communication inescapable. So you may need to conduct a little bit of an audit and figure out where communication is happening in your organization already. It might be on Slack or Teams. There might be a newsletter that gets sent out to employees on a regular basis. There could be an all-hands meeting. Maybe individual teams have stand-up meetings where they invite guests in, right? You don't have to innovate everything. You don't have to necessarily build this from scratch if it already exists. Like I said, a lot of times these conversations are already happening, sometimes informally within the organization. Try and seek those out and partner with them as opposed to, for instance, starting your own innovation newsletter. Another thing that we've seen be really successful is demo days. Make it a lot more hands-on. Like, it's great to be sending out announcements and newsletters, and it's great to be talking about what it is that you are doing and sharing in these all-hands meetings. There's a real benefit to actually getting people's hands dirty, right? To reduce the non-invented here syndrome, you can hold a science fair or a demo day to share what you've discovered. For instance, we worked with one client that invited the entire company of about 400 or 500 people to stop by their lab one morning and wander essentially between exhibits to learn about the different experiments that the team had been trying. We've seen other teams host a design for breakfast session where they have attendees learn a specific new skill for the day. It could be around design thinking. It could be around, like I said, communication and change management skills. But they do it over bagels and coffee so that it's an informal get-together. It's something maybe before everybody's day gets started so that you can dedicate your time specifically to that. One thing that I have learned, never underestimate the power of free food. People love free food and snacks, so if you can offer pizza or bagels or candy or some sort of a happy hour either during or after your demo day, that's a really great way to entice people to stop by. Another thing is not just showing people in mass what you're working on, but again, going back to this idea of working out in the open. We found it's really, really successful to pair people up on a one-to-one or on a small team level and work on cross-functional projects, essentially. You should establish regular meetings, right? Not just status updates with these teams where everybody checks in, but actual meetings where the team comes together to discuss, okay, how are we working together as a team? What could we be doing better? What changes in the market are we seeing? How do we need to adapt so that we are flexible, so that we're meeting those new and evolved needs? We've also seen teams really benefit a lot from variations on mentoring, right? So sometimes that is mentoring one way, either from senior to junior or reverse mentoring from junior to senior. But honestly, it's really helpful if it works both ways, not surprisingly. So look for opportunities to pair people together in a mentoring or a learning situation whenever possible. And I would say last but not least, it's really important to meet people where they are. I know that, again, some of these things are really simple, they're really obvious, but design content, design activities that meets the needs of employees wherever they are. Move quickly to address topical issues. For instance, we just worked with a major luxury brand who was thinking, okay, how do we support our managers in this time of COVID, right? A lot of teams are switching to remote. There's a lot of uncertainty in the air. So we worked with them to develop a training on here's how you lead in the new normal, right? Here's some activities that you can do. Here's what you need to do yourself as a leader to be in a good mindset, to be in a really good position. We were able to turn this around really quickly as well, within about 2 weeks, which was lightning fast for the organization. So it was something that was top of mind for individuals. It was something that they really needed. It wasn't just another thing that like, oh, HR sent out an email that this is not really mandatory, but kind of mandatory. No, it was something that people wanted and were hungry for. So whenever possible, when you're creating these communications, when you're looking for those quick wins, right, think about what is it that is top of mind for your customers. And a customer doesn't have to be someone who buys your product on the outside. It's really anybody who interacts with you, who consumes something it is that you produce. The other thing to keep in mind is delivering information is reaching out to people in multiple reinforcing formats. So, for instance, you might offer some tools on a self-service platform or potentially case studies about the work that you've been into. What you'll want to do is then maybe incorporate a couple of those tools or case studies, reference them in a live training that you're doing or one of your design for breakfast activities. And then in those activities, you can refer back to like, hey, we've created a repository, or we send out updates through the newsletter. Make sure you're signed up. So you really want things to be reinforcing. All right, we've done it. I've almost lost my voice, but I've still got it. So what I wanted to do now was just take a little bit of time and turn it over to you, right? Like we said, when you're a leader in innovation, when you are already a change champion, sometimes the best thing that you need is really not necessarily a specific like how-to plan. You just need an opportunity to vent, an opportunity to connect with other people, make sure like, hey, it's not just me, right? Like, I'm not crazy. I'm seeing these problems all over the organization. How have you tackled it? And so what I wanted to do now was just break into smaller groups and discuss these 3 questions, just 3. This is a variation on what we call a customer sensing activity. So I want you to really think about, 1, who do you need to partner with to make sure that innovation is a success in your organization? You don't have to name names. You can use titles if you want, like, oh, I really need to win over the head of sales, or there's a really influential VP that I want to get onto our side, right? So think about that, what it is that I want to do that. The second thing to do is, sorry about that. The second thing is figure out, okay, what's changing for them? What are some of the emerging needs? Again, a lot of companies are still dealing with COVID, remote work. There's a lot of change in the air right now. So what emerging needs is it that they have? And then the last thing is, what do you need to do in response, right? What is it that you personally can do in order to help that person to get those quick wins, to bring them onto your side so that you can spread innovation within the organization? I think we have about 10 minutes to do this. So my compatriot Amy is going to break people into teams, and I'll let you go ahead and discuss. So Amy, if you wouldn't mind splitting everybody up, and I will call you back when we're ready to share things out. All right. So my question to you would be, of course, was there anything that came up? Would love to hear from you, like what were maybe some of the key takeaways from your discussion. So maybe if anybody would like to speak up, I think we can unmute you and share to the rest of the group. So don't all speak at once, but I would love it if somebody shares. Otherwise, you will be voluntold. That is a very real possibility. So if somebody wants to chime in, would just love to hear what your group discussed. Anyone brave? Let me see. How about Jordan? wanna chime in? Can we unmute you? All right, we can hear you. What were
Jordan
some of the key takeaways?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I was just saying that I think we were together with Arantxa and Alexina and Jordan. I don't know who would like to speak up for the group, but I know we were together.
Oh, okay. Well, why don't you maybe share one or two of the things that your group talked about?
Maybe Arantxa, would you like to, or?
Sure, Arantxa, that's fine.
Thanks. Well, actually, we just discussed the situation because two of the people in the room were working in small companies. They are most of the time fighting with this explore and exploit speeds or engines in the business. And personally, I had this situation where I thought the person I need to gain or to approach was the head of business development and sales, because what I was building was actually fighting against her bonus and her compensation system, and then the whole way the company operates as a million new products and new services that disturb the pricing packages and the offer that she can actually handle to customers. The COVID situation just make us prioritize the day-to-day business to totally change that. Actually, I would say against my interests, obviously, because the CEO has decided to focus on the core. So the thing is, there's actually pretty less that I can do. So I can just wait and offer being collaborative and supportive to the business, but just can do any progress on innovation effort right now.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. Yeah. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I mean, unfortunately, it's not like the whole case. Maybe some other people can walk us through and a positive or a more bright outcome.
No, I think you really bring out, again, that's such a critical part of organizations. It is figuring out what is the incentive structure, what is the reward. If you're asking people to work against their own interest, you're facing a real uphill battle. And if you aren't essentially responsible for them, if they're not a direct report, there's not a lot you can do to force them. So yeah, I think that companies really need to think about incentive structures and rewards when they're trying to encourage innovation. I want to just move us on really quick to a Q&A. We might have time for one or two questions depending on them. So if you have a question, just type it in the group chat. You can send it to everyone. You can send it to me privately, whatever floats your boat. But go ahead, I'll give everybody maybe 30 seconds if you have a question. Again, just add it to the Zoom chat. I'll give everybody just a few more seconds. Otherwise, I'll assume that I've explained everything that there possibly is to know about how to get innovation teams to collaborate more effectively with their organizations. Not bad for, an hour's work. All right, here we go. We've got a question. When is it time to give up on getting people involved? Ooh, that's a really great question.
Yeah.
Yeah. So of course the answer is going to be, it depends, right? I can't be like three times. So I would say there's a couple of things to consider here. No. This isn't negativity. Like, this is real. Let's talk about things that actually matter. So first of all, I would say think about your not just priorities in terms of the wins, but also priorities in terms of people, right? If you have a list of people that you need to connect with, that you need to influence, it is entirely possible that like you'll get to person number 3 and you'll meet and you'll do all the things possible and they're just not budging. Might be time to move on, right? Like you give them 2 or 3 opportunities, they're still not interested. I would say like more than number of times, it is like how exactly they respond. Another thing that you can really do to help win people over is to give them what they want. Like we found that when working with cynics or skeptics, the best thing to do is just figure out like, what is it that you want? What is one thing which would like help get that person on that side? If you can deliver what it is that they want, even if it's a small thing, and usually it is a very small thing, they're more likely to come around. But I would say, yeah, like I can't obviously give you a time, but thinking back to that negotiation, right? What are your alternatives? If you can't reach them, what are you going to do instead? So thinking about that. All right. So with that, we are unfortunately out of time.
I have a
but
question, please, Paula.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. How to engage your partners or your stakeholders and keep them in innovation project?
So you want to keep them involved. One is make sure, like I said, you're having your regular meetings and not just status updates, but actually working through problems, like getting their insights, discussing how the team is working together, what do they see as occurring in the market so they can understand what changes it is that they need to make. If you're working in those cross-functional teams, give them some responsibility, right? Don't just necessarily give them status updates if they want to get involved. Actually, we say deputize, don't delegate. If you delegate, you're just saying like, go do this task and I'll tell you when it's done or if it's right. Whereas if you deputize somebody, you're saying, I trust you to make these decisions. Go ahead and whatever you decide, I'm going to support, right? Which requires greater trust, but it is also a lot more rewarding for that person. So as much as possible, keeping them involved in the updates, giving them projects that they can own and participate in themselves. And then lastly is rewarding them, right? Like actually praising them, thanking them. Gratitude is underrated. Okay, with that, unfortunately, we've got to move on. If you have further questions, if you want to discuss more, feel free to reach out to me. I'm Paula Cizek at NOBL. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. Definitely check out, we have lots of tools on nobel.io. And if you liked the gifts of Jerry Maguire, we actually have a podcast which looks at organizational design and leadership through the lens of fictional organizations. So you can check out workoffiction.fm. And I hope everybody found this enjoyable. Enjoy the rest of your Friday. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you, Paula. Have a nice weekend.
Thanks, everyone.